Ralph Northam says he is a man of great faith, but he had to close the churches because of the pandemic. He had no choice. Ralph Northam is a doctor of medicine, and he says that in a pandemic, there were some things that he just had to do. He had no choice. If you were a child in the 1960s or even 1970s and you got a cold, you may have looked forward to a treatment of honey and lemon, preferably not quinine. And even if you noticed no particular relief from your malady, it was at least a delightful experience with a spoonful of sugar to help you enjoy a short period of inconvenience that may even keep you out of school. And from a medical perspective, these homemade remedies find some support because it was not until the 1960s that science even began to look seriously at the root causes of the common cold. The other Cold War. Asymptomatic signs of cold infection, like coughing and sneezing, or even a runny nose, were not exactly life-threatening. And no one was going to necessarily die from the symptomatic expression of a sore throat, so there was no great evolutionary pressure to mount a serious discovery for the causes of the common cold. But in 1965, if you perform a little medical research, pouring through medical reports that have even cropped up in abundance since the onset of an unprecedented pandemic, you may, with a little effort, discover that two researchers, Hamre and Prochnow, engaged in an effort to address this unsolved mystery of science, finally succeeding in not just discovering, but actually growing a new virus, 229E, of unexpected tissue culture properties from a medical graduate with symptoms of common cold. One such medical research paper specifically states that in 1965, Dorothy Hamre, a researcher at the University of Chicago, took this medical blind spot as a challenge, and she studied the tissue cultures of students with colds. She discovered a new kind of virus, which became known as 229E, or one of the first human coronaviruses ever discovered, also known as OC229E. While it is not particularly alarming that a medical researcher had used medical students to perform medical research, nor even that in these experiments a brand new human coronavirus suddenly came into creation, the very first ever. It is a significant finding, yet, that this laboratory creation remains listed among the 4 common human coronaviruses on fact sheet 508 by the Centers for Disease Control, joined by at least 2 others that have come into existence since 2003, while scientists since have discovered as at least a co-infection with up to 30% of common cold cases since the year 2000. Despite the established fact that common human coronaviruses tend to result in upper and sometimes lower respiratory infections that can be serious, some medical reports are reluctant to conclude that this particular human coronavirus infection from OC229E and others in any way, shape, or form contribute to the signs and symptoms experienced by a common cold patient. This reluctance by medical researchers to identify a pathological agent known to cause specific respiratory tract-related signs and symptoms becomes more problematic, at least from a medical ethics perspective, because from what is known of the secondary attack rate for every human coronavirus known to man, not even one exceeds the threshold of 20% to be designated as infectious or communicable. Even with SARS, a human coronavirus that first emerged in Hong Kong, a place of particular unrest for the People's Republic of China that found primarily community outbreaks and nosocomial or hospital infections that enjoyed a 39% case fatality rate, far more than the current pandemic pathogen, to be validated as an infectious disease or communicable disease that has the ability for transmission from person to person, raising unanswered questions as to how it might even become a co-infection with the common cold. A $40 billion treatment for coughs and sneezes so you can rest medicine industry focused on treating symptoms without any known cure, a trait shared in common with all human coronaviruses, including the present one, for which now at least the relief of a vaccine that has been rushed into production, and like many other industries, from the trillion-dollar boost to GNP by non-medical grade facial coverings industry, and even the transfer fees for cable stations, for which, for the first time in history, exceeded advertising revenue in internet news broadcasts during the pandemic, have actually fared well during a depressed economy for most that some have attributed to a novel coronavirus or simply the pandemic. But good news is COVID-19 relief checks are on the way. Research from the Data Institute at the University of San Francisco, upon which the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, Ralph Northam, had relied upon for his sweeping facial coverings mandate, troublingly states no particular findings nor conclusions regarding the actual protective qualities of non-medical grade facial coverings, determinatively found to be not effective by the NIOSH in 2010 in a study that used the same diagnostic equipment that is used to rate medical grade protection like the N95, but rather focuses primarily upon compelling compliance with the facial coverings mandates, including methods to provide feelings of efficacy and empowerment for the general population of non-essential persons during times that are historically associated with fear, despair, and confusion, using mandates by commercial establishments to close the opportunities for non-compliance by requiring compliance as a requirement for the conduct of commerce, and rest their justification upon a quantifiable finding of morally unacceptable losses as measured in fatalities and economic loss, which those data researchers attribute to a general condition of pandemic and not the lockdown orders even imposed by Governor Northam, which the business leader reported in March was directly responsible for unemployment claims rising from just above 4,000 to over 46,000 and expected to double by summer. This for a cause rooted in medicine that found 57% of blacks and Latinos, some of the most reliable Democrat voters, to be placed in reasonable apprehension of death or grave bodily harm during the last election. According to President Biden, the death toll from the pandemic will soon exceed 500,000 Americans, exceeding 3,300 per day, and 1% of those fatalities were residents of the Commonwealth of Virginia, over half of whom were the elderly in nursing homes, an identified population of high risk of morbidity from the very beginning of the health crisis, but for which neither he nor even Dr. Fauci, purportedly the nation's leading infectious control expert, provided any relief until recently by offering the rapid delivery of a vaccine that has been rushed through production and which has already been attributed to several recent unfortunate deaths. Governor Northam began dodging questions about from the press about the fatalities in nursing homes as early as April, and continued to evade being held accountable in litigations on the issue that were filed immediately after the lockdown orders were implemented, litigations about which neither he nor Attorney General Mark Herring have yet to comment, despite those litigations continuing in the courts of the Commonwealth in both the state and federal judiciary. Governor Northam focusing primarily upon appearing diverse and inclusive, chose Mohammed Norman Oliver as the state health commissioner, who FOIA disclosures compelled by a threat of citation for contempt of court during the litigations discovered had graduated from a college that requires no college entrance exam. Hardly by metric the most qualified African-American doctor in the Commonwealth. This same Dr. Oliver on February 7th issued a formal declaration that a novel coronavirus with no foundation in the science history of human coronaviruses was a communicable disease being transferred from person to person, a conclusion that not even the World Health Organization could support after the review of over 55,000 laboratory-confirmed cases and their tracer contacts in China on February 24th, facts about which Governor Northam continues to be less than forthcoming. At the same time of the announcement of the communicable disease, Dr. Oliver again ignored advice from the World Health Organization that was issued on January 31st, just days before, when COVID-19 became a public health emergency of international concern, or PHEIC, failing to ramp up a tracer contacts follow-up capability, unlike the Chinese, who had dispatched over 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists to perform thousands of follow-ups per day, and who, within just 1 month of lockdowns in Wuhan, had begun to reopen schools and businesses. Despite announcing the collection of over 6,000 resumes, Dr. Oliver, the founder of the Disparities in Medicine Department at the University of Virginia, of record, focused his priorities on recruiting a diverse workforce paid up to $75,000 per year and requiring no medical training at all. But by June, despite 1,300 newly created positions, he had hired only a total of 168, despite his promise to begin hiring not in months, but days. And even today, while continuing to evade both the sheriff and the United States Marshal for service of a summons to be held accountable in court for these actions, they both placed the entire blame upon the former president. As stated by the Supreme Court in the case against General Aaron Burr for treason in 1807, if the gentleman had believed this decision to be favorable to him, we would have heard of it in the beginning of his argument. For the path of inquiry in which he was led him directly to it. Interpreting the American Constitution, he would have preferred no authority to that of the Supreme Court of the country. Yes, sir, he would have immediately seized this decision with avidity. He would have set it before you in every possible light. He would have illustrated it. He would have adorned it. You would have seen it under the actions of his genius appear with all the varying grandeur of our mountains in the morning sun. He would not have relinquished it for the common law, nor have deserted a rock so broad and solid to walk upon the waves of the Atlantic. But he knew that this decision closed against him completely the very point for which he was laboring. Hence it was a decision was kept so sedulously out of view until from the excluded materials of the common law he thought he had reared a Gothic edifice, so huge and so dark as quite to overshadow and eclipse it. Let us bring it from this obscurity into the face of day, we who are seeking truth and not victory. Whether right or wrong, have no reason to turn our eyes from any source of light which presents itself, and least of all from a source so high and so respectable as the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for governor of Virginia. I ask every Christian, every conservative, every Republican, every Democrat, every liberal, every conservative, and every Virginian and American true to like the motto of the imagery. Follow me and we shall overcome. Honest. And y'all come back now. Yeah. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Reach and lead me, guide me and keep me in the shelter of your care each day. 'Cause I am a seeker.
AIDA. A, attention. Do I have your attention? I, interest. I know that you are interested. D, decision. Have you made your decision for Christ? Action, honest.